1 Kings chapter 11. So you get a glimpse of the stuff that I do between Sundays. I actually do work. 1 Kings 11, verse 1 to 13. Now King Solomon loved many foreign women along with the daughter of Pharaoh, Moabite, Ammonite, Edomite, Sidonian, and Hittite women from the nations concerning which the Lord had said to the people of Israel, "You shall not enter into marriage with them, neither shall they with you, for surely they will turn away your heart after their gods." Solomon clung to these in love. He had 700 wives and who were princesses, and 300 concubines. And his wives turned away his heart. For when Solomon was old, his wives turned away his heart after other gods, and his heart was not wholly true to the Lord his God, as was the heart of David his father. For Solomon went after Ashtoreth and the goddess of the Sidonians, and after Milcom, the abomination of the Ammonites. So Solomon did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, and did not wholly follow the Lord, as David his father had done. Then Solomon built a high place for Chemosh, the abomination of Moab, and for Molech, the abomination of the Ammonites, on the mountain east of Jerusalem. And so he did for all his foreign wives, who made offerings and sacrifices to their gods. And the Lord was angry with Solomon because his heart had turned away from the Lord, the God of Israel, who had appeared to him twice and had commanded him concerning these things, that he should not go after other gods, but he did not keep what the Lord commanded. Therefore the Lord said to Solomon, "Since this has been your practice, and you have not kept my covenant and my statutes that I have commanded you, I will surely tear the kingdom from you, and you will give it to your servant. Yet for the sake of David your father, I will not do it in your days, but I will tear it out of the hand of your son. However, I will not tear away all the kingdom, but I will give one tribe to your son for the sake of David my servant, and for the sake of Jerusalem that I have chosen." Amen. The word of God. Now you had a chance to get a good look at the life of Solomon. This remarkable man, history records him as the wisest and the richest and the most powerful man who ever lived in history of mankind. Truly remarkable from the perspective of our earthly ambition. Maybe Solomon is one of those guys you would benchmark and say, "I want to be like him." But from the spiritual point of view, from the point of view of the Bible, what we have here is a man who seemed like he was blessed in so many ways, but one who had forsaken it all. He's the one who lost everything. He's the one who, at the end of it all, was left with nothing. No longer there was any compliment from God, who was so eager to compliment him. In fact, he was so loved when he was born. God called him "My love." That was the name that he has given specifically for Solomon. Solomon was chosen among many, but his life simply declined to what seems, as we read today, a point of hopelessness, humanly speaking. When Shakespeare writes his dramas, the dramas usually either end as a comedy, which means it has a happy ending, or a tragedy, which means it has a very sad ending. There's still a question. Was Solomon's life a happy ending? Was Solomon's life a sad ending? But from the perspective of the historian who writes 1 King, it is a tragedy. It's a sad ending. His life ends at the end of chapter 11. We didn't read it, but basically he rules Jerusalem for 40 years, and that was the end. And he was buried. And his history, nothing more to be said about him. Why? Why? My huge question is this. I mean, this is a question that I should be consumed with because I'm concerned myself. If Solomon was so blessed, if Solomon was so wise, if Solomon was such a remarkable man, why did he do all this? Why did he fail so miserably? What happened? And one answer that I can give comes from Ephesians chapter 4. When Paul talks about those who are outside of God, he calls them the Gentiles, and I think this is more of a spiritual designation than an ethnic designation. He says, you must no longer live or walk as the Gentiles do in the futility of their minds. Futility of their minds. That reminded me of Solomon, because you probably remember that in the book of Ecclesiastes, which is sort of the reflection of Solomon's own life from his own perspective, he basically says vanity of vanities, all are vanities. There's nothing to claim in his life. That's pretty sad. And it matches with the word here, futility. That's what it is. Those people who are outside of God, their minds are in vanity, in futility. They are darkened in their understanding. I especially mark on that word understanding, because that's a word about wisdom. It's a word about your insight. It's a word that you are a very intelligent human being, as God created all men to reflect the image of God. And one of the images that we see of God is his sheer intelligence. God is the one who thinks brilliantly, and that brilliance was reflected on mankind. Yet that mind, that understanding became darkened. That shows me what happened to Solomon. Why? It says, alienated from the life of God. Due to the hardness of their hearts, they have become calloused and have given themselves to sensuality, greed, to practice every kind of impurity. Even though Solomon was just an amazingly brilliant man, he was intelligent beyond measure. His wisdom was renowned in history. Yet, you see that his mind is darkened. You see that his heart is hardened. You see that his intelligence weakened. And the question is why? Is it because he didn't have enough knowledge? I think he still kept much knowledge in his head. In fact, he was still brilliant in a way. But why? Why all this decline? And that, I would say, is because, as Paul hinted in Ephesians chapter 4, it's about the desires of your heart. You see, what darkens your wisdom, what shakes up your spiritual constitution is not whether you have knowledge or not. It's not the knowledge, it's not the knowing so much that messes up your spiritual life. Though knowledge is still important, but more important than that is the desires of your heart. It's the loves of your heart. It's what you love. I want you to think about it. What is it that you love? You know, when you like something, well, I like this piano, that doesn't mean I love it. I know it's good, it's useful, it's nice to look at, but that doesn't mean that I love it. I like it. I think it's valuable. You know, a lot of things we think that's what love is, but no, love is what consumes you. Love is what sucks you in. Love is that which takes all your might, all your mind, and all your heart. And God said, you need to love me with all your heart, with all your mind, with all your strength. God wasn't exaggerating, because that's what love is. When you love somebody, you are consumed by that object of love. It's the love that changes you. It's the love that makes you who you are, you see. Whatever that you love is going to shape you. It's going to set your agenda. It's going to change the way you live. So when it comes to Solomon's life, Yes, he was brilliant. Yes, he was wise, but there's something about him that really began to mess him up. That is, the loves in his life, in his heart, were misdirected. He loved the wrong things. He no longer loved God. He no longer loved the promise God has made for him. He no longer loved the word of God that was transmitted to him from his father, who was faithful to God all through his life. So there were some faults that we can find about him, but God forgave him. God loved him because he was faithful to the covenant. Solomon, on the other hand, did not stay in that relationship. He failed to love that which should have been loved. But instead, he loved the wrong objects. It's the love that makes you blind. So what is it that you love? What is that consumes you? And I think we're living in a generation where some of you might say, well, I don't really love anything. There's nothing that I'm passionate about. I'm really bored with life. And maybe the problem is that you have very little desire that is, really activating you. But I'll tell you what, if that's your answer, I'll give you a very good interpretation of that answer. That is, you are possessed by the idol of this generation. You know what that is? It's the idol of comfort. It's the idol of inactivity. It's the idol of non-commitment. It's the idol of, basically, I'm just going to do whatever I want. Don't make me do anything. You love that, and you are consumed by that. You just want to sit and do nothing. That's what you're consumed by. That's your love. I think that answers it. It answers, for me, for example, why sometimes I'm just so unwilling to do anything. What did Solomon love? What were the loves of Solomon's life? And I could give you a few. Number one, clearly says here, Solomon loved many foreign women. I mean, what's the issue with loving so many women? But anyway, whatever that is, there's no doubt in our mind, if you read this passage with me carefully, that Solomon really loved them. Because that expression appears a few times, and at one point it's described as he clung to them in love. He clung to them in love. In other words, his life was consumed by these women. What was the issue here? Why? What's the problem? The problem is that not that these were women. Let's not make this some sort of a gender issue. That's horrible. Women are the problem. No, that's not what it's saying. It's saying there were issues that these women brought with them, infiltrated the identity of Israel by bringing with them their own religion, which Solomon loved, essentially, at the end of the day. How could he? Because he loved them. He loved these women. He could not resist. Towards the end of his life, you see that he's not only not resisting, he's promoting. And we'll talk about why he was promoting, most likely. I actually found this a series of novels. And these are novels, so these are creative work, not history per se, written by Jill Eileen Smith. It's very interesting that there is such an author. And her specialty is basically taking a Bible story and making it into a creative novel. And she wrote a series called The Heart of the King, and it's the story of Solomon. And it's really not the story of Solomon, I should say. It's the loves of Solomon. And she wrote 4 volumes, and each volume features different women in Solomon's life. I found that very interesting. The first woman in the first volume is a woman named Naamah, the desert princess. That's the title. And I'm thinking, wow, this is really creative, because I don't know on any Naamah in Solomon's life. And then as I read further in the First Kings, I said to myself, oh, how could I miss it? There was a person named Naamah in the Bible, and that was Solomon's son, Rehoboam, who essentially succeeded him. His mother is Naamah, and she is a Moabite woman, or Ammonite woman, I'm sorry. So, yeah. So that's the first volume. The second volume is about a woman named Abishag, and I think this is very creative too, because I think she's merging here the woman that he loved in the book of Song of Songs, the Shulamite. And somehow she seems to be converged with that woman, the young woman that appears in 1 Kings chapter 1, who essentially was a servant to the aging man David. She was beautiful. The third woman that is written about is Pharaoh's daughter, and she's given a name, Siti. And then the fourth woman, it's very interesting, is the Queen of Sheba, who the historian writes about in chapter 10 of 1 Kings. And there's also a name associated with her, Nikala. I bet the author did some historical research and found the woman of that name, one of the queens of Ethiopia, possibly in history. But anyway, these are all woven together into four very intriguing stories about four women in Solomon's life. Now, I have a little different thought about the last one, though, the Queen of Sheba. You see, in the 1 Kings, right, in this book, in 1 Kings, you know that the story of the Queen of Sheba, Queen of Ethiopia, in chapter 10 is rather elaborate. But she's very different from the woman that Solomon loved, which becomes an issue. Did Solomon love the Queen of Sheba? Was there some kind of romance? Well, that's a story that one may be intrigued by. Actually, I'm not so intrigued by it. Because from the biblical standpoint, the story of Queen of Sheba is not about Solomon being misled by a foreign woman who brings a different religion. But here is a queen, here is a dignitary from faraway land who hears about Solomon's fame, who hears about Solomon's wisdom, who hears about Solomon's accomplishments, and she comes over, and at the time of her departure, you need to listen to her words. She's not saying, "Oh, great, that was nice." She didn't walk away feeling like she was just entertained, but she goes away basically saying, "Oh, blessed be the Lord. Blessed be the God of Israel. Blessed be the God who established you, Solomon, as such a wise man for his own people." So I think the Queen of Sheba story is more of a missional story. It's more of an evangelistic story. It's about what God established Israel for. This is really the height of the Davidic kingdom, where these foreign dignitaries are coming over to see what's in Jerusalem. They see the glory of God, and they take the faith in God with them when they leave. So this is very different from these other women who are bringing their religion, their idolatry, their gods, and then transforming the culture of Israel in the wrong direction. The second thing that Solomon loved, I think this is leading from the first one, I'm sort of reading into it as well, is that I think Solomon loved his power and influence more than he loved God, essentially. His power and influence, in what sense? I believe that the fact that Solomon married so many women, it's not a reflection of his heart's love for them. The reason why there were 700 princesses that he married is because 700 people groups all over the world, they tried to come under Solomon's wings. They're trying to put some sort of connection, political alliance with Solomon. And Solomon did it. Solomon loved it. There were 700 wives and 300 concubines, and all these 1,000 women represent something of interest that is outside, many of them, outside of Israel. Solomon probably felt in his heart, "Oh, how great I am now that I have all these people under my wings." So many nations, so many people groups, so many kings and queens. They want to be connected with me. Connected with me, how beautifully successful I am. He's drunk in his own success. Drunk in his own success. Solomon knew better. Solomon knew better. Solomon was very deeply versed in the book of Deuteronomy. He knew the book well. Otherwise, he would not have prayed that wonderful prayer in chapter 8. In Deuteronomy chapter 8, God tells the Israelites, hey, here's a warning. Take care lest you forget the Lord your God. When you have eaten and are filled and have built good houses and live in them, when your herds and flocks multiply, and when your silver and gold is multiplied, and all that you have is multiplied, then your heart be lifted up, and you forget the Lord your God. Beware lest you say in your heart, my power and my might of my hand have gotten me this wealth. So God knew what's in the heart of these people. You see, when you are having a hard time, when your life is going through a tough periods, perhaps it's relatively easier for you to seek after God. It's easier for you to cling to God and ask Him for help. But when everything seems to be going okay, when finally things seem to be falling your way, you have things to eat, you have things to wear, you have place to shelter. Far more than that, you begin to feel like, I am affluent, I am wealthy, I think I could invest in all these things for greater wealth and comfort. That is when you forget God. You say to your heart, it's my power and my cleverness that built all this wealth for myself. I did it. And you begin to lose some of the most precious things in your life. You lose sight of God. One of the symptoms that I see in this historical narrative that we've been reading, in chapter 9, verse 10, something I could have overlooked, but thinking from this angle, it seemed to make sense. And it's a little story about a man named Hiram. You know Hiram, right? A couple weeks ago I told about Hiram because he's the one who was the great ally. He was a great friend to David and also to Solomon. It's the man named Hiram who was the queen of Tyre, or king of Tyre, a place called Tyre, Tyre, which was sort of, meeting at the northern border of Israel. The great cedars grew in that region. And Hiram, the king, supplied all the materials for David's palace. He's the one who supplied all these great things for Solomon's temple, as well as Solomon's palace, for decades. Hiram was a faithful and a loyal friend. And then at the end of all this, when Solomon felt so successful, when he felt like he had everything, Solomon did something to Hiram that truly disappointed him. Solomon gave him a gift of some of the cities up in the northern fringes of the nation of Israel. He would just give them away. And Hiram came to look at those cities, and he was so disappointed because they were just teeny little villages that amounted to nothing, and he felt very offended. So he asked Solomon, brother, what is it that you gave me? I mean, it's said in a very gentle way, but I think he's really saying, all that I've done for you, so much that I've done for you and the loyalty to your father, is this how much you love me? Is this how much you appreciate me? And it's a small detail in the history of Solomon, but you do have to ask question, why are these small details there? Bible is a precious book. God has intended to make into very targeted, very deliberate word for us. Why is it there? I think it's there because it shows the symptom of a man who's drunk in his own success. He begins to become very disloyal to those that built him to be who he is. The old friends begin to walk away from them because they become so self-absorbed in their own success. Years ago, there's some very, unsavory, very distasteful memories in ministry. So we're talking about 20 years ago. We had a couple in our church. The man was a doctor, the woman, a beautiful young woman whom I've known ever since she was a teenager, because in California I was her youth pastor. And I love them. He seems so great. And she did all that she can to support him through medical school and all that stuff. But now finally he became something of an importance. And their relationship began to drift away. I counseled them a number of times. And the man would give me this answer and that answer, and essentially came down to it's because she is not good enough for me. And that really began to hurt me personally because, I knew her from way back. Maybe this was a really lopsided counseling. I was on her side. But it didn't take long to discover that he was having an affair with a nurse at the hospital. It really hurts. Maybe you have heard about things like this, but it actually happened in the ministry 20 years ago. So don't try to guess who they are. That's not going to help you. But it's the idea. It's the idea that when you are drunk in your own success, you forget the most important people around you. And you begin to feel like, I did it. And suddenly, the one who so loyally supported you all this way, they seem not good enough for your success. They seem too little, too puny in comparison to what I become. And that's the worst thing a person can do, I think, when you are drunk in your success. I think Solomon also loved his accomplishments, and it takes a little bit of imagination, but here we have a picture in chapter 11 of Solomon building all these shrines for the gods that his wives brought, right? And where are they built? On the other side of the temple, so east side. So you see, the temple is on the top of a mountain. It's not a huge mountain, but it's a high place in the city of Jerusalem. It's called Mount Zion. It's what used to be called Mount Moriah. And there's the temple, and it's an imposing place. And that temple, and then around on the other side, you see all these smaller shrines. And Solomon is right there next to the temple in his palace, and he's looking down from the top, and he's looking down into that whole area just filled with all these impressive looking buildings that he built. He was really into projects, including the temple. You might imagine there's something like this. There's that art museum, right? The beautiful art museum on top of the hill, and there's that boulevard that goes right to the city hall, and all these flags are there in the center city. There's a Rodin Museum, there's a Barnes Museum, there's a Franklin, museum. And you see from the top of this big museum, look down, it's all there. They look beautiful together. They all blend in somehow. And for Solomon, that's what he did. He built all these beautiful buildings, including the temple for God. Yeah, God's temple is right here at the center because he's the God of Israel. But all these other things are there. He's sitting there and he's probably thinking like in his heart, wow, what have I become? I've become the most successful politician of my age. I've created here the most religiously pluralistic and inclusive society. All the people of the world can come and rest under the shelter of my influence or my affluence. my wealth, my greatness. And you guys could all come, set up your little things. And in fact, I'll build them for you because you don't have money. I do. And I did all this to create this beautiful city where people of every religion, every origin can come and find their rest because I'm such a great politician that brings it all together. The problem is, Solomon was not a king of a secular state. He was not a king of any state. He was a royal priest of God's kingdom. See, when you read the Old Testament Israel, you don't see it as simply a state. You don't see it as a nation. It's not a political entity. The Old Testament Israel, God deals with it not as a nation, but as a church. Old Testament Israel is the Old Testament church. There's bad theology that associates the Old Testament Israel with the current state of Israel, and that's not a good connection, biblically speaking. There may be some connection, earthly speaking, but that's not the point. We are the new Israel. We are the New Testament church. We are the ones. See, Israelites is the church of the Old Testament, but through the gospel ministry, it expands into all nations. The Old Testament is not simply a people state. It's not a political entity. It's a religious group. It's a church. You have to see it that way. And Solomon is not just a king. He is a priest between God and his own people. Not Solomon's people, God's own people. And God is going to save his people through the king, ultimately the Son of David, Jesus Christ himself. But this Solomon had forgotten his identity. What has he become? He's become a politician, a successful, affluent, incredibly wise to do what? Create a pluralistic and inclusive society where everyone just gets along. Why not? Ultimately, Solomon loved himself. Ecclesiastes 2:9, he says, "So I became great and surpassed all who were before me in Jerusalem." I'm the greatest, he says. "Whatever my eyes desired, I did not keep from them. I kept my heart from no pleasure." He thought he could do everything and anything he ever wanted to do. And he did, he says. But you know what? That's the confusion here. What the writer of the history is trying to say is that, well, Solomon might have thought that he did everything his way, but no, it's the wives who controlled him. This is really degrading. But that's what he's saying. Why? Because when Adam and Eve took that forbidden fruit, they thought, hey, it looks good. It's desirable to my eyes. It looks good. It'll make me smart. I like it. I'll make that decision to do it. But the writer of Genesis makes it very clear that it was not their decision. They were simply obeying the voice of a lesser creature, I should say, a serpent. Doesn't even say Satan, an angel. That's too glorious. A mere crawling serpent becomes the master of their hearts. That's the foolishness of unbelief. Now, I don't have time to say so much more yet. I think we're at the most important part of the message. What does God do? It's really about God. I mean, it's not about Solomon, because Solomon's story just comes over several chapters and God's going to continue to work in these people that's messed up. But it's about God. What is God doing? And I'll tell you very simply this. God is faithful to his covenant. What are the loves of Solomon? It's all the wrong things. What is the love in God's heart? It's you and me. God loves us. God loved Solomon. God loved David so much that his promise he continues to keep, even to a point. This great God enters into a business of disciplining this little man named Solomon. Well, before God's eyes, he's nothing but a dirty human being. Yet God chastises him like a father chastises a child. Because God is faithful to his covenant. And he continues to promise, I will send you my beloved Son, Jesus, into the world. The lamp in David's house shall never go off until that light for the world comes to you. What shall we apply then? I have a number of things I love to say, but I'm just going to boil it down to one thing. That is, you need to take seriously your covenant communities. Brothers and sisters, I'm going to say this with tears in my eyes. You're not a politician in your home. You are a priest. You're not dealing with your children to please them the way the world pleases them. Your family is a covenant family. It's God's family. It's a covenant family of faith. That's why we even infant baptize them. You're not a politician. You're not there to please them. You're not there to satisfy them with the worldly things. You will provide as a father. You will provide as a mother, but may the words that come out of your heart preach the gospel of Jesus Christ, not the gospel of great American dream. The great political state of pluralistic and inclusive Israel was Solomon's message, and his children were ruined. So was he. You're not a politician. Get it into your head. You're not a politician. A Christian politician needs to do a lot of things. He could go to church and act like a Christian. He could go to a Buddhist temple and act like a Buddhist. He goes to a mosque of Muslims. He needs to act like one of them. He's a politician. Politicians do political things. We have political life. Yes, we do. We have a bigger world in which we live. You know, if anyone asks me, would you prefer a nation that persecutes those who are not Christians and you have this kind of Christian theocratic idea? You want to live in that country, or you want to live in a truly pluralistic country where everybody has a chance? Much my choice. I'll live here, not here. Because secular state is not meant to do it. That's not how God brings about the gospel to his people. Not by swords, but only by the sword of the Spirit and the Word. The best place for Christians to operate is when we have free reign, when we can do what we do to compete with everything else, all other world ideologies, because gospel is true. I want a pluralistic society. I want a pluralistic nation. But I'm not going to make my covenant family pluralistic. I'm not going to make our church pluralistic. Anybody who has great ideas about how to be an inclusive church, and you come in and say, hey, why can't we do that? Why can't we do this? And I'll tell you what, you can do that out there, but not here. Why? Because this is a covenant community of faith. We serve one and only God, who has a say over everything that we do because we belong to him. Not me. Solomon was wrong because he became a politician, not a priest. When he is a priest, he shouldn't be a politician. He was drunk in his success, thought that he was so 멋있어. He thought he was so great. Wow, look at all that I've done. There are a lot of 멋있는 fathers. There's a lot of 멋있는 mothers. 멋있는 means has a sense of charm. You could be a charming father, but an ungodly one. You could be a charming mother, but an ungodly one. And if that's what you're going to be, I think God will have a little bit of discipline headed your way. Hopefully this doesn't sound really harsh. Hopefully. I really pray that I am not being mean to anybody, because we're not in that kind of culture. Everybody, we just be nice to one another. We can be nice. But please, why are we here? Why are we worshiping? We're worshiping God. You need to bring your children to faith. How? Preach the gospel. Preach the gospel of Jesus Christ at home. Preach the gospel of Jesus Christ whenever you sit with him. Preach the gospel. Don't preach the secular gospel of success, affluence, comfort. And hey, I got something to boast about in my family. Lord bless you as you put this into your heart. Yeah, I sometimes seem a little too passionate, but I do pray that you understand. Because a lot of it is about me. How I have not done my job either, because I tell you what, it was very easy for me to go home and say, I'm not a pastor at home. Let me just be a man. Let me relax. Don't make me preach to my kids all the time. They probably won't like it anyway. So it was easy for me to walk away from that, but now they're all grown up. Thank God, God still keeps them in His reign. But I have a lot of regrets. Because there were times when my kids were so willing to listen. I could gather them, they would praise with me. They loved to hear me. But that didn't last very long. But I was too politically correct in my heart. Oh, I don't want to be an authoritarian dad. I don't want to press my faith on him or her or them. But I think I was missing the point. Well, here we are. The great life laid down for us. You see, it's serious because Jesus died for this. Jesus died for you. Jesus died for your children. And the bread and the blood, the body and the blood that Jesus broke for us, shed for us, it's for each and every one for whom Christ died. And if it's that serious, we got to take it seriously. May the Lord bless.